In this video, we're going to look at absolute value. We'll look at the rules for absolute value. Then we'll look at some absolute value examples. And finally, we'll see some absolute value problems. So first of all, what are the absolute value rules? The absolute value signs look like this. So you will see a number or an algebraic term between the two vertical lines. Absolute value is a positive number. So, for example, if you have a negative number between the two lines, the absolute value of that negative number will be a positive number. For our first rule, what is the absolute value of x? The mathematical representation of the absolute value of x will be the x symbol between two lines. Absolute value is always a positive number, so the absolute value of x is x. Let's look at our second rule. What is the absolute value of negative x? The absolute value of negative x will be represented as negative x between the absolute value signs. And the absolute value of negative x is x. You may also be asked to calculate the negative of the absolute value. So let's look at the rules for that. You need to use the rules on this screen when there is a minus sign outside the absolute value sign. The negative of an absolute value is a negative number. So let's look at our first rule for the negative of the absolute value. What is the negative of the absolute value of x? The negative of the absolute value of x will be represented as x between the absolute value signs with a negative in front of the absolute value signs. So the negative of the absolute value of x is negative x. Let's look at rule 2. What is the negative of the absolute value of negative x? The negative of the absolute value of negative x is represented as a negative sign in front of the absolute value sign with negative x inside the absolute value sign. Remember that the absolute value of negative x is equal to x, but here we have the negative of the absolute value, so we need to put a further negative in front of our answer to get negative x. So the negative of an absolute value is always negative. Now let's look at some absolute value examples. Example 1. What is the absolute value of negative 12? You may want to pause here for a moment if you wish to solve this yourself. So looking at the absolute value of negative 12, you need to know that the value between the lines becomes positive. So we have the absolute value of negative 12, which then is equal to 12. Here is our second example. What is the value of the negative of the absolute value of negative 12? Again, if you wish to solve for yourself, pause here. In this case, our final value is negative. So the negative of the absolute value of negative 12 is equal to negative 12. Let's look at our first problem. So here you are being asked the absolute value of xy when x is equal to negative 10 and y is equal to 14. Pause here for a few moments to solve. The answer will be shown on the next screen. The correct answer is D. To solve, you need to substitute the values for x and y. So we have the absolute value of xy, which is equal to the absolute value of x times y. So we substitute negative 10 for x. The absolute value then of x times y is equal to the absolute value of negative 10 times y. Next, substituting our value for y, the absolute value of negative 10 times y is equal to the absolute value of negative 10 times 14. Then next, doing our multiplication, the absolute value of negative 10 times 14 is equal to the absolute value of negative 140. Finally, then, remember that the absolute value is always a positive figure, so the absolute value of negative 140 is equal to 140. Now let's look at problem 2. What is the value of the negative of the absolute value of x times y when x equals 4 and y equals negative 6? Pause and take a few moments to solve. The answer will be shown on the next screen. The correct answer is B. Again, you need to substitute the values for x and y to solve. So here we have the negative of the absolute value of xy, and substituting first of all for the value of x, we get the negative of the absolute value of 4 times negative 6, which is our value of y. Multiplying that out, we get the negative of the absolute value of negative 24, which is equal to the negative of the absolute value of 24, which is equal to negative 24. We hope these demonstrations on the absolute value have helped you. Please search online for ExamSam study aids and media. You'll find more great materials online and on Amazon. You can also find ExamSam on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us.